Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tom Miles. I'm the Dean of the Law School, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you all today. Thank you for joining us for the Chicago Journal of International Law's 2021 Symposium. Now, it's always an honor to welcome scholars to the law school for a conference because academic discussion and debate are the core of what the University of Chicago is all about. The university's mission is serious and searching intellectual inquiry and participatory learning and teaching. Our intellectual inquiry here aspires to be broad and far-reaching and rigorous, focused on the most important social questions, and in an environment dedicated to the free expression ideas, often unafraid to challenge conventional wisdom. Now, perhaps this is why the University of Chicago faculty have so often made path-breaking contributions and helped define entire fields of inquiry. When one says the Chicago School, one's going to be more specific. Does one mean sociology, economics, literary criticism, law and economics? Faculty members in the law school, too, have also made paradigm-shifting contributions. Over the past century, the law school's faculty were pivotal in establishing administrative law, legislation, comparative law, and other topics as legitimate fields of inquiry in law. Now, in the law school, the commitment to searching inquiry has, from our founding, meant an interdisciplinary approach. And today's the day when the university announced its 14th president. And so it seems especially appropriate to quote the university's first president, William Rainey Harper. Harper said that a true education in law implies the scientific knowledge of the law and of legal and juristic methods. A scientific study of the law involves the related sciences of history, economics, philosophy, the whole field of man as a social being. It's very exciting that today's conference is so in keeping with this distinctively Chicago vision. The topic of this year's symposium is the transformation of international law scholarship. The growing use of field experiments, surveys, and other applications of social science is transforming the study of international law. There's been a new emphasis on empirically informed conclusions, and this is injected what some scholars say is a much needed skepticism, or at least a desire to test claims more systematically. Scholars here at the law school are both participating in and studying this shift. This shift is especially relevant at this moment in time as the field of international law confronts difficult and important questions, such as globalization and rising nationalism. Now, as a result, the Chicago Journal of International Law chose to convene leading scholars from all over the world to study both the history and the future of the field. Today's discussion will center on an essay by Tom Ginsburg, the Leo Spitz Professor of International Law, Adam Chilton, Professor of Law, and Daniel Abebe, the Harold J. and Marion F. Green Professor of Law and Vice Provost. In their essay, they advocate for a rigorous, fact-based approach to the study of international law. Their paper discusses the theoretical and normative approaches that once dominated the field, and then it traces the growing influence of the scientific methodology, which can take several forms, but ultimately involves identifying a specific question, developing hypotheses, testing those hypotheses through the use of qualitative or quantitative data, and presenting conclusions that acknowledge the study's limitations. Then, in a true Chicago spirit of dialogue and debate, we will hear from more than a dozen other leading scholars who have submitted essays responding to Ginsburg, Chilton, and Abebe. Among them are papers discussing the limits and critiques of the social scientific approach, the application of the approach in places such as China and Africa, and an evaluation of the methodology's usefulness in studying race in international law. Now, as I mentioned, learning at Chicago is participatory. Often that involves the Socratic method in the classroom, but it's not limited to that. And I'm delighted that this symposium is hosted by the Chicago Journal of International Law. The student-edited sigil, as we call it, was first published in 2000. It is an interdisciplinary forum for the discussion and analysis of international law and policy issues. I extend my thanks to the student editors of Sigil for planning the symposium and working with Professors Ginsburg and Chilton to organize it. And thank you to all our scholars participating today. I wish that we could welcome you in person to the law school, but I'm delighted that we're able to welcome you in this remote format. And then finally, thanks to all of our students, faculty, and program attendees. Enjoy today's discussions. I hope they blaze new paths in our understanding of international law. Welcome to all of you. And with that, I will turn the program over to the editor-in-chief of the Chicago Journal of International Law, Nima Hakim. Nima, take it away.
Thank you, Dean Miles, and welcome everyone to the Chicago Journal of International Law's 2021 Symposium. Before we begin with our first panel today, I'd just like to briefly share a few remarks. First about our journal, and then about today's event. The Chicago Journal of International Law, or CJIL, published its first issue in the spring of 2000. Consistent with the trend across American law schools, students at the University of Chicago understood the study of law would be incomplete if it ceased at our national borders. CJIL has since published scholarship by jurists, ambassadors, and leading academics, as well as younger academics, fellows, and our students. All the while, CJIL has pledged itself to a simple mission: to provide an interdisciplinary forum for the discussion and analysis of international law and policy. Today, that mission has never been more critical. In the middle of a global pandemic, in an era of rising nationalism, nativism, and inequality, in a time where the climate crisis poses an existential threat, it is long past due to consider an external approach to international law, to critique it, and to consider new methods of study. Not because international law is unimportant or irrelevant, but because it has never been more important and more relevant, and we need creative but practical solutions. That's why we are hosting today's symposium, to give a voice to a perspective which emphasizes a healthy skepticism, normative restraint, and data. Common threads which unite the scholars at the University of Chicago Law School, as well as a rising generation of international lawyers. In doing so, we recognize the importance of critical analysis, which is why we have invited leading scholars from around the world to offer us their perspectives. It is our hope at CJIL that today marks just the beginning of a conversation, a moment to reconsider how we study international law, to ensure that our collective future is one where justice, fairness, and equality are more than just words on paper. While the 21st century's crises often seem insurmountable, I hope today's event offers some small reason for hope. 1 year ago, as the new editors of CJIL, we didn't even know if a symposium would be possible. Clearly, we were wrong. The world has gone through this pandemic together. A demand for transnational communication has breathed new life into our capacity to host conferences like this one. As I just reviewed the registrations from this past week, I was inspired to see hundreds of people from countries all across the world who made the time to join us today. I find tremendous hope in the fact that this international law journal is now able to host a truly international discussion. And I'm excited that later today, we'll be joined by panelists in China and in Singapore, for whom it will be a Saturday morning, not a Friday evening. And so as we reflect today on the transformation of international law scholarship, I hope journal editors continue to recognize the importance of global perspective so that whatever the future of international law might hold, it rests on a common foundation. Thank you again to all of you who are here today, to our panelists who have made the time to join us, and to our staff who have worked tirelessly to make this symposium possible. CJIL is proud that today's conversation will be memorialized in its 22nd volume, which will publish early this summer. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jared Mayer, CJIL's executive article editor, who will introduce and moderate our first panel.
Thank you, Nima, and thank you also to Dean Miles. Thank you to all the panelists for participating in this symposium and all of the attendees for joining us this afternoon. We're delighted to see that this symposium has received such a warm reception and high turnout from scholars from across the globe. Engaging in rigorous academic debates is part and parcel of the University of Chicago's mission, and it is CJIL's mission to have those debates regarding international law with a truly international audience. Our topic today centers on the social science approach to international law scholarship. As the name suggests, the social science approach to international law uses the tools and approaches common in social science disciplines to examine international law's contours and efficacy. The social science approach's calling cards are empiricism, informed by quantitative and qualitative data, skepticism regarding international law's efficacy, and normative restraint in prescriptive claims. While many of our faculty members here at the law school adopt the social science approach in one form or another, we are aware that other scholars have varied views regarding that approach. We hope that this symposium brings all of those views to the fore. Our symposium then will follow with 4 panels. Vice Provost Abebe and Professors Chilton and Ginsburg will lead the first panel with their presentation laying out and arguing on behalf of the social science approach. We will then hear 2 presentations on the ways in which the social science approach can be applied to important and long-standing issues in international law scholarship, some of which have been previously neglected. The second panel will discuss some of the further applications of the social science approach in international law. Our panelists will discuss if and how the social science approach applies to international economic law in Africa, the nexus of the Islamic legal tradition and international law, and reform proposals to various international legal institutions. The third panel is devoted to revisiting Professors Jack Goldsmith and Eric Posner's book, The Limits of International Law. Panelists will discuss developments in international law and international law scholarship since the book was published, and will determine what limits there are on the insights that the limits of international law provides. Our final panel will focus on the quote-unquote internal aspect of international law. Taken from H.L.A. Hart's infamous analysis in The Concept of Law, scholars have long noted the importance of analyzing law, as it were, from within. The panelists will discuss international law scholarship from this perspective and will examine the extent to which the social science approach can conflict or complement this perspective. All panels will feature the same structure. Each panelist has an allotted amount of time. After all panelists have presented, we will open up the floor for questions and answers. Since all members of the audience are muted, members of the audience should send questions directly to me, Jared Mayer, via the chat function during all Q&A periods. Panelists, however, should feel free to unmute themselves to join in the conversation. And after each panel concludes, we will have a 15-minute break. With that, let me introduce our presenters for our opening essay. Daniel Abebe is the Vice Provost of the University of Chicago and the Harold J. and Marion F. Green Professor of Law and Walter Mander Teaching Scholar at the University of Chicago Law School. Adam Chilton is Professor of Law and Walter Mander Research Scholar at the University of Chicago Law School. And Tom Ginsburg is the Leo Spitz Professor of International Law, Ludwig and Hilda Wolf Research Scholar, and Professor of Political Science at the University of Chicago Law School. With that, I turn the floor over to the first presenters.